Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to have people kind of trickling in and connecting to audio as we go. So we're just going to give a few more moments before we get started to let everyone get connected. Great. Okay. Hi again. So my name is Colleen McCoy. I'm the outreach coordinator at the Center for Latin American Studies at Vanderbilt University. So I'm coming to you live from Nashville, Tennessee. Thanks so much, first of all, for joining tonight's discussion, Coronavirus and Latin America, Education in Mexico and Argentina. So this program is the second of a series in collaboration with the Stone Center for Latin American Studies at Tulane University. And I'm joined here tonight by my colleague from Tulane, Denise Woltering Vargas. So tonight we've teamed up also with the Humphrey Fellowship Program at Vanderbilt University, which you'll hear more about in just a bit. So hang tight on that. Okay, so quickly before we get started, we would love for you all to share your location in the chat box. So it can be really fun when we're all zooming in from different places to see all of the places you all are zooming in from. So you already know I'm in Nashville, but we'd love to see where you guys are. So if you want to take your cursor and go down to the bottom of the screen, you're going to see a chat box down there. If you click on that, you'll be able to type in your location, your city, your state, your country, and it's just super fun for everybody to see who's joining us tonight. So thank you for participating already in that way. Okay, some other Zoom logistics before we get to the good stuff. So try to keep background noise to a minimum by making sure you stay muted throughout the call tonight. So you came in muted, you don't have to do anything else, just sit back and relax and enjoy the panelists and the moderator presentation. And in case you're worried that you may have unmuted yourself, you can look down in the left-hand corner and see if there's a big slash over the microphone. That means you're still muted, which is a good thing. Okay, so even though you're muted, we still want you to participate. So we're gonna encourage you to enter any questions related to education and the themes that the panelists are discussing. You can put those in the chat box throughout the discussion as well. So you'll see that chat box again at the bottom of the screen when you hover your cursor over it. And so keep them pretty brief because our moderator is going to be able to relay them to our panelists at the end of the discussion. She's very happy to do that on your behalf. If you would put your name before you type in your question, that way she can acknowledge that it was you that asked the question. And we really appreciate that. Another way to connect with you, even though we're doing this through screen. It really helps come together as a group. Okay, so speaking of our moderator, it's such a pleasure to introduce her tonight. Her name is Dr. Nancy Dickson. She's the program director for the Humphrey Fellowship Program at Vanderbilt University. Dr. Dickson also teaches in Vanderbilt's Department of Leadership, Policy, and Organizations. She served as the director of the Abu Dhabi Leadership Induction Program, as well as the program manager for the Tennessee-Shanghai Leadership Collaborative at Vanderbilt. So thank you so much for being here, Dr. Dickson, and I will turn it over to you.
Well, it is wonderful to be here today, and we are so glad to be collaborating with the Center for Latin American Studies at Vanderbilt, as well as the Stone Center for Latin American Studies at Tulane. So we're so thankful to be here and talk about Corona and education in Mexico and Argentina. So really quickly, what is the Humphrey Fellowship, you might be wondering? It's a Fulbright exchange for educational leaders from around the globe, and Vanderbilt has been hosting fellows for over 12 years, and we have with us today two of our outstanding alumni, most recent alumni, to talk about their experiences with education in their home country. And I'd just like to take a minute to introduce our guests, and then we'll move into our conversation. So first we have with us is Patricia Garcia from Argentina. And she was the former executive director of Misiones, Argentina. And so she's bringing to us the nonprofit and the NGO kind of perspective of working in rural education and the context of the supports provided to schools. And then we also have Maika Maria Dorantes Moguel, the supervisor of primary education for the Secretary of Public Education in Yucatan, Mexico. So she'll be able to bring with us the perspective of the Ministry of Education and the public sector for education. So we're so excited to have them with us today. And what we're going to do today is kind of provide a little bit of an overview of education in their home countries, just so we can kind of wrap our heads around where we're going. They're going to provide a snapshot of the current COVID situation, but remember, we're not experts in COVID, but more experts and have expertise in education, so that you kind of see where we're going. And then what we'd like to do is provide an overview of where what their countries have done in response to the current context, and then what they're planning to do as their school years continue or open. So without further ado, we'd like to start into this conversation.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. And thank you also for the Center for Latin American Studies at Vanderbilt University and for the Stone Center Latin American Studies at Tulane University for hosting this space for conversation and to get to know what's going on in the region. Just to introduce a little bit of the context about Argentina, I'd like to tell you that the population of Argentina is about 44 million people. Our education system is a federal system, so we have 24 provinces. That means 24 education ministers, but also a national education minister. The schools depends on the provincial ministers, but the national education ministers can provide some resources, funding, or programs nationwide. Our system, our education system of students, it's around a little bit more of 10 million students, K-12 I'm talking about. And the public education students is a little bit more of 7 million students that they go to the public schools. A big difference about the academic year, we start the classes on March. So our academic year is from March till December. And in July, we have our winter recess. This is different from the Northern Hemisphere. Just have this in mind, because when COVID started and impact, we were on the beginning of the academic year. And a little bit, I'm going to talk about more the rural education, rural context schools, as my experience is basically from there. So as to have an idea, our education, the economic social status, the context of the rural areas in Argentina, we have 65% of the students, they belong to high vulnerability families, and 24% middle vulnerability. That provide us almost 90% of the students, they belong to high or middle vulnerability families, meaning by this that the context they came from is very difficult, like difficulty access to technology, internet, drinking water, electricity, even access to the schools. It's quite a challenge. So these are some ideas just to have, yes, to highlight some points to give you an idea of the scenario in Argentina and the rural schools. Do you want to continue, Mike, about Mexico?
Yes, and thank you, Pato, for this introduction about Argentina, and also thank you to the Stone Center for Latin American Studies in Tulane University and the Center for Latin American Studies in Vanderbilt University too, for this great opportunity to share and have this talk about this issue that is happening in our countries right now. And as Argentina, I'm going to have a little overview of our educational system. So for you to know, the population in Mexico is around 126 million of people. And similar to Argentina too, we have also a federal system. And although we have a Secretary of Public Education can define all the policies that are going to be implemented along all the Republic, each state has certain kind of autonomy to decide how to implement these policies according to the challenges and the context that are in each state. In our K-12 system, we have enrolled more than 25 million of students, And as you can see, most of them are in our public schools. This means that maybe, yes, we have some participation in the private system, but most of them are for the urban context, and the private schools are in the cities, although a minimum are in rural areas for primary and preschool education. It's almost inexistent in secondary or in community education system. Another thing that maybe you need to know is that our academic year comes from August to July, and this is going to be important in the way that we are going to implement the strategies during the COVID contingency. Because also Mexico is a country with big inequalities, and as you can see in the graphic below, most of our children lives in poverty conditions, more than 51% of them. And also, and this is when the thing with inequity start to figure out as a big issue, is that 66% of them lives in rural areas. And although our rural school system has 22% of the whole enrollment, well, you can see that there are more poverty in the rural context than in the urban context, because only 41% of them lives in a city. And living in a country where more than 80% of the people lives in the cities, this means that living in a rural area has certain link to live in high vulnerability conditions. And we need to figure out how to manage that when we are creating the strategies to reduce the equity gap in our schools and our communities.
Thank you for sharing and giving us that overview. I think this is really helpful for us to start thinking about and comparing our systems with your systems. And yes, that the emergence of that equity gap has really amplified during this current state of COVID. And as you know, we here in the United States continue to address our concerns with COVID, but we're curious about what does the current state of COVID look like in your countries? What are the numbers looking like, and how has that been handled? Really quick, if you could tell us that. Thank you. Pato.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Nancy. Well, in Argentina, till this weekend, June 12th, we have almost 29,000 infected in the whole country and 817 deceased people because of COVID. The quarantine for schools started on March 15th, and on March 20th, the quarantine and lockdown for the whole country started. So schools started the quarantine on March 15 and 20, the whole country. And we are still in quarantine. So it's been a very strict quarantine for the whole country, but the evolution of the COVID now, it has concentrated more infection people in the province of Buenos Aires and in the city of Buenos Aires. Just a reminder, we have almost 34% of the whole population of the 44 million people in Argentina. Almost 18 million live between the province of Buenos Aires and Buenos Aires city. So it is highly dense populated, this area. And the infections are specifically in these areas. In some provinces, we don't have many quantity of infected, or even there are no diseased people. This means that some provinces, the last week, have been more flexible with the quarantine, but still, the classes has not started, except for today, I will tell you in the next segment, today in one province, classes began to start. But yes, that's the things here with COVID in Argentina. Maika, I give you the post.
Yes, and thank you, Pato. Well, the evolution in Mexico of this disease has been like almost similar to other countries, and I can say that maybe a little bit similar to Argentina in the way that the school closure started in similar dates. We have 2 different dates because 10 states started to close the schools on March 17 and the rest of the Republic on March 23rd. But since our first case that was on February 28, we have seen how the curve started to increase until this month of June. So for June 12, we have more than 139,000 people infected and more than 16,000 people have disease by this really, really sad pandemic that we are living now. And as you can see, the infection is spread alongside all the Republic. And in the reddish parts of the map, you can see some clusters with people is infected more than in other areas.
Thank you for helping us understand kind of when quarantine started, where it shows where the timelines sit together. That's really helpful for us to kind of pull those together. But now as educators that were thrown into this unique situation in March as well, with school closures, we want to hear about what your countries were doing. What were the strategies and resources that teachers were able to adapt to meet the needs of their students? How did the government respond with different policy materials? What were NGOs doing to support this transition to remote learning for those rural communities? We're looking forward to hearing about what others are doing and thinking how we can learn from you. So if Maika, you'd like to share with us what Mexico is doing.
Yes, of course, thank you. As I said before, well, the quarantine and the school closure started on March, and we have an early spring vacation that lasts for a month when this usually lasts only 2 weeks. But in that time, the Secretary of Public Education start to figure out what will be the strategy that they will implement for the continuity of the learning, because they realize that the in-person classes couldn't be available for the rest of the school year. So they implement this program and a strategy called Aprende en Casa that implies the use of different media, mainly 4 kinds of different resources. That was the use of the textbooks that all the children and the students have since the beginning of the school year, just to continue use and make the activities on that textbooks. The other is the use of the TV to broadcast some programs with the content of the activity and the activities that they should be doing in their schools. And they have reached around 94% of the students. The radio was another way they use, broadcasting some programs for 10% of the students that they can see that it was less the reach, but it's also good to know that most of these programs were broadcasted in indigenous languages, and they reached the furthest communities for the urbans in the cities. So it has been really great that they have this kind of media, and the use of internet, of course, that was used for 55% of the students. Alongside with this, we have the on-distance activities that the teachers developed for their students for their classrooms. And then you can see how this start to increase the gap, because although some of the teachers and the students have the resources, the technology to continue the online activities, some others doesn't have that kind of facility. And then you can see that maybe some schools manage really well how to implement the online lessons, but some others doesn't have even internet or electricity to continue the activities. Also, there were some other digital resources and session plan that the Secretariat shared with the teachers so they can just readapt and adjust the curriculum to the current situation. The booklets that also were sent to some rural areas. And a thing that I actually like is the partnership with Google, because they allow that teachers and students can have access to all the Google Suite platform and use all the applications for free. And because many of our school personnel doesn't have the facility to use these applications, they start to develop a series of webinars that are going to continue all the year. I think that maybe at the end of the next academic year are going to finish. So it's going to be a really good resource for the teachers. And right now they're in the talks about what are going to be the next steps. And maybe it's between a leveling course or alternative attendance, but it's not, we are not sure about what are we going to use. Also, the civil society is just pushing about the equity and how we can develop more inclusive strategies. So we need to think more about these kind of situations. And well, Argentina, Pato, what do you think? What is your current situation?
Well, in Argentina, we have many similar strategies as you have. We have this hybrid system of trying of many resources at the same time, having digital resources, public radio, public TV, printed booklets, photocopies, and private initiatives from the teachers. And I will go a little, talk about a little bit about that. But one thing I would like to say before talking about this is that we have to use a lot of strategies, and it's really very different the way the teachers have answered to this, because we did not have, and the schools, and this is a very big gap, and we have in Argentina is the technology internet access. Not only for the rural schools have no internet access, and the family do not have internet in their own homes. But even in the cities, many schools do not have a good quality system of internet, or the families of the students do not have access to internet. So having said this, there have been many strategies. So on one way, we have the digital resources that we have Educar. Educar is an institution that belongs to the education, responds to the ministry, National Education Ministry. Educar has led many programs nationwide. For example, they have before, some years ago, the last years, they have provided more than 5 million computers on a program that was, the objective was to arrive one student, one notebook, and they have provided more than 5 million computers. And it has another objective of taking internet to the whole schools in the whole country. That, of course, has not been done yet. So rural schools have no internet. So this is really very interesting, the creativity of the teachers. In answering this, they have taken photocopies, they have managed through the radio to send message to the families in the rural areas to specify a day, a time when they can meet together, and the teacher could provide or the printed booklets to the students, or provide photocopies from activities. Regarding the booklets, this was a specific strategy. There you can see a photo of one of these books, of activities. The first strategy when COVID, the quarantine, this pandemic started and arrived to Argentina, there were two groups working in the education ministry. One wanted to specifically respond directly the first days, and other group were thinking of strategies for the following month. So this printed booklet acknowledging that not schools have not access to internet, they printed this, so they have activities per week. So you have every grade, these activities. This is nationwide, so this went to every school, but the schools and the teachers, they could choose whether to use it or not. So for some teachers have been very helpful having this. Other ones decided not to use it. So this was, part of the initiative of the teachers to use it or not. And then the other important thing is that schools are a very important social actor in the community, and they provide food for the families, for the students. They provide lunch. So schools still are open, maybe only to provide the food that they give in boxes to the families, and they could, they deliver this, they try to cover this also. And the last very small thing to say is that some NGOs that works in the rural areas, they have tried to pass to the digital platform. So many NGOs that have provided for professional development training to the teachers, they pass all that for the platform, and they could continue support the teacher during these digital platforms. So that has been great work from the NGOs to move fast and accompany and don't leave the teachers alone. Well, this is a little bit just to give a context, and I will be happy to answer in the Q&A segment more questions about this.
This is really amazing, and the rapid pace in which the responses in both countries emerged. And I really love, and as teachers, we really love to hear that teachers weren't forgotten in helping with that transition, and the importance of thinking about how to support teachers along the process. So thank you. So now, as many districts and states are starting to roll out their plans for reopening or possibly reopening schools, come August and September here in the US, we are very curious now to hear what you all are doing in your countries. What are the next steps for your system? So if Maika, you'd like to tell us a little bit about what Mexico will be doing to make this all happen.
Yes, of course. And well, we are in the end of a school year, so we are figuring out how to start the next school year. And the Secretary of Public Education, in the last couple of weeks, they released these 9 interventions that they pretend that every school implement. But every kind of these steps has certain kind of challenge that we need to figure out how to do it well, depending on the school and the community context. For example, the first one is the creation of a participatory committee of school health, that this is going to be built with the parents, with the teachers, and any other person from the community that will be interested in participating in these activities. And we need to see what are going to be their processes and what are going to be the activities that they are going to develop in the schools. Also guarantee the access to soap and water, or at least hand sanitizer for each school. And they start to think that maybe they can use a program called La Escuela es Nuestra to have some resources and budget to guarantee this access. But also we need to think that maybe not all the schools, and this is not only apply for rural areas, but also in the cities, they don't have access to water. So we need to figure out first how to overcome this challenge to actually think that all the children are going to wash their hands before entering to the classrooms. Also, another initiative is to take care of teachers in higher risk groups. So all the teachers that have a chronic disease should be, they need to be more aware about the conditions. And yeah, we need to figure out in between the number of people that we need to be more careful about their own health and well-being. The use of compulsory face masks for teachers and students, maintain a social distance. That also is going to be difficult if the children need to interact between each other to maintain the 1 or 2 meters of distance in all the activities of the school day. That's going to be a challenge. Maximize the use of open spaces, the cancellation for any ceremony or meeting, and also early detection of cases. This means if one person from all the school personnel, or the school community is infected, all the school is going to close. but also we need to figure out how much time and what are going to be the other conditions to the school closure for that cases. And the creation of social emotional support for teachers and students that I think it's a really great idea. And if we can see in the next slide, this is the pretended calendar for the end of this academic year and the beginning of the new one. Because as you can see, we usually end our classes on July, but right now we are just finishing them on June 19. And for all the administrative side, although the online classes finish it on June 8th, and they start a new program called Verano Divertido, but this is only for the children to continue the activities in their houses, although they doesn't have a link with a score or a qualification for the next school year. And we are pretending to start on August 10th, depending on the number of cases, with a leveling course of 3 weeks. And in September, start the new school year. But as I said, this only depends if it's safe for the students, teachers, and all the people involved in the school community to reactivate the in-person activities of the schools. Argentina, Pato, what do you think about, well, your current situation?
Okay, thank you, Maika. We do not have that calendar. I wish we had a calendar like that one. We do not have it yet. Well, we have expectations, of course, and one of the ideas is to start in August, the classes. Even though some provinces are talking of opening the schools before. Today, in Jujuy, this is the north of Argentina, they have started, so these are the first province that is reopening schools. So this is like really fresh news, and they are opening the rural schools. This is phase 1, and today opens the rural schools. So the idea is to, and this is, how can I tell? One thing is the public policies and the norms. I've been working in an NGO for more than 10 years, and I've been visiting the rural schools for more than 10 years in the whole country. So I can say that sometimes we have the public policies, we have the policymakers that they think things, but the reality is different. And so what it really happens sometimes is different. And I really think that now, and I hope that this COVID situation could narrow the gap between the policy thinkers and the public policies and the intentionality and what really happens on the everyday basis at the schools. One thing is, before COVID, we already have a situation, for example, access to the internet is very difficult, no access to drinking water or sanitation facilities in the schools, and this continues. So, for example, the rural schools that they're opening today, here is starting the winter. So these schools do not have heat, for example, or they don't have tap water. So it's really, I don't know, like a question mark, how they will open, because we know and everybody agrees that safety for the kids is the first thing. So we have to guarantee that. And for guarantee that, we need funding and resources to do that. So the next steps that our thinking is how to reopen the schools. The schools will be, in this school, in Jujuy, for example, for the rural schools, there will be residential schools. The students will sleep in the school for 20 days, and they will go back home for 10 days. All the rural schools that already were residential. But usually the residential schools are from Monday to Friday, and during the weekend they could go back to their homes. But now they will try this system of being 20 days. Why is this? Because they want to reduce the traffic of people. They want to reduce the movement of people, of teachers and of students. So they want to keep them 20 days at the school and 10 days go back home. Other things that they are thinking, other strategies that they are thinking for the reopening is to have maybe 1 day in-presence class and the rest day homeschooling. So that depends on the number of classrooms the school has, the quantity of the group the grade is. So they will be divided. Another thing, Buenos Aires is thinking, and they're talking about this Israel model, that this model is 4 days school and 10 days homeschooling. So you can see there are many conversations about this. In concrete, Jujuy started today. Phase 1 is for rural schools, phase 2, the other rural schools, bigger ones, and then phase 3 and 4 are the urban schools. So let's see what happens. And just to wrap up this idea, and we can see the next photo. These photos are from rural schools, and these are typical photos from rural schools from Argentina. These plastic basins where they wash their hands. These are the big questions, like what happened with infrastructure and what happens with internet access. This is a very big inequity that it was before COVID. I mean, COVID, nothing new came with COVID. The problems we used to have, we still have it. I think this COVID highlighted and put a zoom, a focus on the inequalities that already existed before. It's not that we have problems because of COVID, but we have to think strategies, to resolve strategies, not strategies. We have to really think to resolve these problems, these challenges, as internet access, as infrastructure, on the long term. If not, it will be very difficult to keep the safety protocols they're going to think about if we do not have how to wash our hands. That would be very difficult. It would be really very challenging. And one thing I want to say, the students also, as in Mexico, it's mandatory to use the facial mask. So every student will use facial mask, students and teachers. And also inside the classroom, of course, they will keep the 1.5 meter, the distance between each of them, of the students. But it will be very challenging to know how they will do that if they have to sleep all together in the same room. I mean, in the residential schools, you only have one room where they can sleep. You know, one room for girls, one room for boys. And would be very challenging how they will separate the beds, for example. So that, in the concrete case, is not resolved, although in the protocol, they say they have to do it. Again, I think we are relying a lot on the teacher's creativity to do this. And I know I'm out of time, but we always have expressed how teachers, many times they're heroes. And I myself, a lot of times, I recognize the value and the worth of the teachers. It's amazing, the work they're doing. I think it's time maybe to think in a way that this education system does not rely so much on heroes, but just on professional, you know, like the regular professional teacher, and not to expect them to be heroes to resolve these situations. So let's see how it continues, but it will be very challenging in certain schools, in many schools, to follow up the protocols. I mean, we have the protocols, but reality sometimes goes on another way. So it's an open question. And thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Maika and Patricia, giving us that, the overview of how schools hope to move forward. And I see even the comments that are coming through. So is this the practice or the policy, or how will that all emerge? And so thank you for kind of giving us this information, getting our juices flowing, helping us make some comparisons between our country here, for those of us that are here in the US and for those that are also all around the world. It's wonderful to see such a global audience and the questions that were coming in. And the first few questions that I noticed were emerging that really were aligning with what Pato was saying here at the end around this equity gap and how the pandemic has definitely amplified the equity gap. And so one of our questions comes, we've kind of two questions around equity gap. One comes from Macarena from Chile. Sorry if I butchered your name, but she's curious around the digital divide and how do you think, or what are your systems doing to address the digital divide between the urban and the rural settings, and what are some strategies that they're using or could be used? And then the other piece on the side of the equity gap as the idea of budget funding, and where is funding going to come from as we have economic crisis already starting to emerge? And are you seeing this budget allocation changing over time now that we are in a kind of more of an economic crisis? So we'll start with the digital divide question, and then we'll move into the budget question first. So why don't, Maika, if you want to kick us off with the digital divide, and then we'll then open it up to Patricia.
Yes, of course. Well, with digital, that's the thing. It's like many of the strategies are they have been developed thinking that you have access to electricity, to internet, that you have a TV on your house, or at least a radio. So they have implying that almost every family can have this kind of access, although in the context when you are with the families, when you go to your work every day, you realize that this is completely different. And you need to start to think that previously, to think about technology and how to implement these strategies, you need to figure out how to solve these inequities in access to primary resources. I mean, access to water, access to electricity, that many of us, we couldn't think that we could live without electricity or without tap water, but many people live in that condition. So before that, you need to solve that situations. And that's the real challenge, because we also thinking too, or giving too much to the shoulders on the teachers, because the teachers in rural areas need to be more creative about how to solve that kind of challenge than others that maybe are working in cities or with better conditions. I am not saying that other teachers have more challenge or not, but there are different the way. And we are relying a lot on the teachers. So I can say that for some communities, the teachers are going to the communities, although they say that it's quarantine time and self-isolation and they don't need it, but they are going to the schools, they are visiting the families just to figure it out and just to see how their students are doing. So we have this kind of situations right now. And we need to, as I say, we need to take care more about our teachers and build more strategies, thinking about how to solve these conditions before asking someone to connect to a laptop or to have access to an online session.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great. And Pato?
Well, in Argentina, we have a program that's called Conectar Igualdad. Conectar Igualdad is a national program. It's a very good, actually it's a very good program in the sense of what's the purpose of the program. And this is what I mentioned before, that the objective was to give one computer to each student. So since from the year 2010, 11, this program started more or less, and 5 million computers were delivered. The thing is, it has not been keep the same through all the years, this program. And here's when the importance of the public policies. There are some to narrow the gap, that was, I think, the question, to narrow the gap between the digital, especially between the private and the public system, because private schools, many of them have a lot of access to internet, or they have the access to computers, or the families, they have internet. You need public policy, because this is really it's very costly. And I think you need not only public policy, you need a national policy, and be sustained through time. It doesn't matter who the political party is at the moment. I think some policies should be kept, sustained, and be careful. And I have Uruguay. Uruguay is an excellent example how they did with Plan Ceibal. They keep it. It doesn't matter which is the policies, the party and the government. Every year after year, they always kept this, and they have 100% internet access for everybody. I mean, Uruguay is a role model in this, and I wish we should follow that model. So I think to narrow the gap, we need internet everywhere, and not because of COVID. And this is very important. We are in the 21st century. We need technology, not because of COVID. If we already had been inside the 21st century, we could have done a better answer to this unexpected. But the thing is, we have to be in the 21st century. We need technology, we need internet. It doesn't matter if it is because of COVID or no COVID. We just need to give the same opportunities for every student. They need that skill. Technology is a tool, an instrument. It's not a means in itself. I'm sorry, it's not an end, it is a means. So we can do many things, and we all know that we are users of the technology. But we have to provide that same opportunity for everybody, and we need the help for that. So yes, we need to maintain and keep national public policy.
Thank you. Yes, I think that speaks to this digital divide, and thinking about how this situation has really just amplified an equity gap, not created new concerns. So thank you. However, there is a concern around budgeting. Budgets have always been tight for education, and they're going to continue to get tighter as we are thinking about infrastructure, new systems, trainings of teachers, so ensure that we don't have to just be heroes, but that we can be professionals in the field. What are you seeing in your countries around budgeting for schools, funding, and how that looks like it's going to play out as we move forward in this next academic year or the current academic year, like in Argentina? So Pato, would you like to start the conversation?
Well, that's a tough one. Budget. Well, it's Argentina has been through an economic crisis. So I don't know, it will be a challenge. I can say that budget is challenging because you need the material resources, and there's no doubt about that. And not all the provinces or not the regions in Argentina have the same way to answer to that. Not all the regions have the same strength around economics. And so the support of the nation would be important. And I know it will be difficult. So it will be very challenging. And for example, for today, for Jujuy, I was talking to some supervisors and teachers, and I was asking these same questions. Are you having more budget for cleaning supplies, for example? And the answer was no. They don't have more budget for cleaning supplies. So it will be, I don't know, challenging. And again, we will rely on the creativity of the teachers, how they will resolve this. It shouldn't be like that. So again, I don't know, maybe I guess there was some international organization fundings, and that will be managed on different level of conversations. And I don't know that, but I do know it will be challenging.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it's important to recognize, I mean, you were already moving into an economic crisis even before the pandemic hit. And so understanding that dynamic and how that's going to play out is important. Thank you. Maika, tell us what is happening in Yucatan.
Yes, well, I have to agree with Pato that maybe budget is always a difficult situation. And it's really different because it's different from the US that, for example, each school, I in my role as a supervisor, I can say that we don't manage money. We are not allowed to manage money. Maybe if a program is giving money for a school, then you can have access to make some upgrades to infrastructure, or depending on the program, you can have a budget for certain things that you need, but this is not for all the schools. Also, the people who decide which school is going to have certain budget and which school doesn't. We don't actually know how they decide this, because we as teachers or principals, we couldn't claim for more budget for our schools. So for us, this has been like really difficult because, as Pato was saying, we are relying on the creativity, on principals, teachers, the parents, if they can make some donations to the schools, maybe, because our public education is free, we couldn't ask them to give money for the school. And that's another thing. So yes, I mean, in the interventions I say like, okay, this is the way that the secretary is thinking, but when you apply that to the real context, you realize that maybe you don't have money enough to buy or to make the changes in infrastructure that you need for your school to have the basic conditions, because this is not around COVID, it's things that we needed to solve before that, because we are in 2020 and we haven't solved even basic necessities for the schools and for the children.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, and I think we're all on that same page of where can we think about funding and how can it come and how can we be creative with what we have and do more with less. So thank you. Moving to, we just have probably time for maybe 2 more questions. And one question we're going to go to Argentina, and one question we're going to go to Mexico. We had a question, or kind of a group together, some questions around what is, and being Argentina a leader in the field, in education in the region, how are the COVID and education and education conversations being held regionally, and are decisions being made around schooling based on what's happening in countries around Argentina? Like, are you looking at what's happening in Brazil and Uruguay and Chile? How is that influencing how the rural policy decision making is happening?
Well, yes, we are looking. I know, for example, talking about Jujuy, because they have reopened the schools today. Jujuy had borders with Bolivia. And for example, in the schools that are near the border, they have not reopened. So yes, they're looking, because they have to see, there's a lot, interchange in the borders. They're very very vulnerable places, the borders. It's very common. You just go walking there. The borders are really very near. You can go walking. You have like a city here, and you walk a little bit, and then you're in the next country. And sometimes it's very common that families from the other side of the border, they go to the school to Argentina, so they cross the border because it is near. I don't know why, but they cross the border and they come to the Argentinian schools that it is more near the border. Yeah. So those schools are not opening today. And yes, they're talking. I mean, I know that some groups, the ministers that are saying what they're in contact to see what strategies are in the region and in other countries also. I know that they're talking. I mean, I think everybody, like all of us, we are trying to get more connected, and that is a good thing, that we are interchanging experiences, we are interchanging what's going on, and we are doing that interchange. So I guess, yes, we are talking like this. I mean, we are NGOs, we're talking also like how are we facing all this. Yeah.
And that's what, we have to look at some silver linings here. And yeah, how are regions, countries coming together to collaborate and think about solving these big issues. So that's wonderful to hear that those conversations are starting, and hopefully they're in support of each other and thinking about how we can't work in isolation. So that's fantastic to hear that's starting to happen. And for Mexico, there's kind of a question around the work of, in rural education, access to just printed materials. What does the printed materials look like in schools and in homes? Do they have books and resources in native languages? What does that look like in the rural communities? And then how are NGOs working in collaboration with the system to support literacy for the community, the rural communities?
Well, first we need to realize that the public system in Mexico have different subsystems. That is, for example, general education. And in general education, all the textbooks are in Spanish and are for all the schools that are enrolled in that subsystem of general education. These textbooks are sent for all the children at the beginning of the school year, and they are for free. They don't need to pay that. There is one of the things that was developed in the 1960s, 1950s, something around that, and they continue just doing this kind of textbooks. But there are another two subsystems that are for indigenous education, are the communitary systems that are for schools that most of them are smaller. They are further from urban clusters, and it's more difficult to access to them. And although there have been some initiatives to provide textbooks in native languages or to teach them, well, at least in the law, in the policies, it's stated that all the teachers that go to that school need to teach in the language, in that language. This usually doesn't happen until now. And that has been like really difficult, because it's like we are pushing those communities to speak Spanish, although they need to be teach in their original language. For example, I can say that here in Yucatan, where the Maya is one of the biggest indigenous language spoken by, I can say, like more than 10%, 20% of the population. Well, there have been some books, they have released some books in Maya, but they are not the same as the textbooks that we are giving to the general education. So that's one of the things. So they receive some textbooks in Maya, but all the activities doesn't correspond to the national curriculum for their general system. And then you can say, well, then what are we teaching in the indigenous system and in their general system? Because also they have been communities with both schools, one in the indigenous system and another in the general system. And many parents decide, okay, I need for my child to go to the general system instead of the indigenous, because I believe they learn better if they learn in Spanish than in their original language. And that has been like a really big problem because it's decreasing the number of people talking in that way. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing what that's looking like and how that's developing. And I know we've run out of time for our conversation, but I see there are still some more questions, and so we'll try to get to those questions and in the follow-up give some more answers. So if you have some more questions, please be sure to pop them right on into the chat, and we'll try to get you your answers. Colleen will be doing a follow-up, and she'll be sharing both Maika and Pato's email address, so feel free to follow up with them directly as well. They look forward to hearing from you. And we would just like to say thank you to each of you for spending an hour with us in this conversation. It's such a joy to see maybe the pandemic has created some real challenges, but it has shown that we are a global village looking to grow and learn together. So we're so appreciative of having all of you with us today and the great questions you all had. Colleen, do you have any last remarks?
Just thanks for everyone for joining us, and the three of you were brilliant. I think everyone got a lot out of it, and it was such a pleasure to watch all the comments come in. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great night. We'll be following up by email to everyone who registered for this event. So if you had a friend that didn't make it, they can see the recording once we've got that edited up on the website. So be patient with us for that as well. Have a great night and keep these conversations going. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for everything.
Thank you.
Thank you.